Krishnamurti categorically says that there can't be freedom without the elimination of the self or individuality, which he says is the same as the ego identity in consciousness. And he equates the self and individuality with all of the psychological problems in the world, both personally and collectively. And then he says that that freedom means that you move from consciousness into the universal mind, and in the universal mind there is no self. So Krishnamurti would say there is no Krishnamurti, there is no personality, and therefore you could ask, well, who is it that's talking about that? If Krishnamurti says there is no Krishnamurti, then who is it that's talking about that? If he's no longer a personality, how is he communicating? And what form has he got in the universal mind? If there's no form, there's no name, there's no person, then what is the reality of that person, Krishnamurti, that no longer exists as a self? And I think it's an impossible situation where there's no way that you can eliminate your consciousness of yourself and be something else. I mean, what could you be? Because he said it's emptiness, it's truth, it's love, it's compassion, this universal mind. So how would you exist in that? What would you be? You wouldn't be a human being, you wouldn't be a personality, you wouldn't be a self. So what on earth could you be? Because even when you go into dreams, you're still your identity in a dream, you're still yourself, and you can recognize the dream when you leave your body, as it were. And even in Tibetan Buddhism, when the Buddha goes into the emptiness of nirvana, which is the one mind, he has a body of wisdom, or he has a diamond body. So again, there's the self or individuality within the diamond body. And in the psyche consciousness, you have a dream body or a astral body, and then you have a physical body. And the way that Krishnamurti chooses to define the self is that consciousness is a self-centered activity that breeds all the problems in the world, the conflicts, the violence, the jealousy, the hate, but also all of the positive things. So both the negative and the positive are all seen to be consciousness psychologically that should be eliminated. I would have the complete opposite view to Krishnamurti. I think the self is the main fact of anyone's life. The self is the, you might say, the permanent fact that is with you all your life. And yes, you have problems. Each person has problems in the world. There are 7 billion people or more, each with their problems. And in society, in relationship to each other, in relationship to the world and institutions, people work out their problems as they live day by day. And most people go to work, I think they find fulfillment in their work. Many people are dedicated to their work. They're dedicated to art and music. They're dedicated to university education and school and teachers in all the subjects of history. And all of that culture and society is very valuable. And yes, there are problems, and there have been problems for thousands of years. And that's part of human nature, that's part of human society, human civilization. And I don't see a problem psychologically in the fact that people have problems. I don't see a problem in that. Some people live more tragic lives than other people. Some people live a successful life, a fulfilled life. They're happy. They enjoy nature, enjoy music, enjoy companionship. And things are different for different people. Some people are rich, some people are poor, some people have enough money to live and buy things and enjoy life. And in science you have problems like nuclear energy, nuclear bombs and that kind of thing, and I think the superpowers are doing quite well keeping the nuclear problem in check. And you've got climate change, and people are concerned about that. People are concerned about the ethics of genetic engineering. I think society in general is based on trust. It's based on dedication. It's based on understanding. And I think people on all levels of society, political and religious, etc., I think people are quite focused. They know what the problems are, they're working on the problems. I mean, even the problem between religion and science, I think people are working on that all of the time. There are meetings all of the time, politically and educationally, socially, psychologically. So I feel that the human race, the people I live with in my community, in my city, I think that it's very stable, people cooperate, people get things done, and there are lots of minor problems to do with running a city, or running a school, or running a university, or running a business, or running various political institutions. And why shouldn't there be problems? I mean, if you look at nature, I mean, every animal has to deal with the difficulties of nature. And if you look at the world in general, or the solar system, and the cosmos in general, I mean, it's very unpredictable. There's lots of titanic forces, quite destructive forces. So I think the destructive nature of the universe and of consciousness and thinking and emotions, there's a lot of destructive behavior. But that's again part of the conditioning of the world we live in, the universe we live in. I mean, it's built into the fabric of everything that exists. Problems do exist. And why shouldn't there be problems? And why should they be solved 1,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago? Why should they be solved? Part of living is living with the problems and dealing with the problems. That's part of, you might say, the living condition. I mean, if you're going to paint a picture, compose some music, do a scientific investigation, there are all kinds of difficulties and problems that might upset you, that might be quite subjective, they might be emotional, they might cause all kinds of contradictions and frustrations. And why shouldn't that be part of the process of making things happen in the world? Culturally, socially, psychologically, emotionally. Why shouldn't there be all kinds of difficulties? So Krishnamurti seems to me to be an idealist that wants to paint a black and white picture between the world that's corrupt, which is the world of self and consciousness psychologically, and then there's this universal mind that's perfect, that's the truth. So that black and white idea, to me, doesn't work. I think in my own life, I think the mind, the one mind or universal mind, is a reality for me personally. But on the level of myself and consciousness and living in the world, I mean, all my life it's been complicated, and why shouldn't it be? And to me, the self is the very essence of one mind, as it says in Tibetan Buddhism. The Buddha nature is the essence of the one mind, the individuality, the indivisible self. And in Zen they talk about the self nature. No, I think it's a very destructive thing to communicate to people, the idea of eliminating self, and then saying, you know, there'd be nothing left. And the absurdity to say if there's nothing left, then nothing. If Krishnamurti's gone into the universal mind, and that's separate from the body, as he says, and he's in the universal mind, and he's in pure emptiness, and he's become nothing, then what's the point? I mean, what on earth, why would anyone want to do that? I mean, why on earth would anyone take the risk of doing anything like that? It sounds absurd. I think it's not possible to do that. I mean, the idea of self-inquiry, self-knowledge is part of the wisdom tradition, it's part of religion, it's part of Aboriginal culture, the whole idea of knowing yourself in the Delphic oracle, know thyself. And why is self mixed up with psychology? Why is self mixed up with personality and in ego, identity and consciousness? For me, self is not a product of consciousness. The self is the self. And the self-aware person is in the one mind. And the awakening of the self-aware person in the one mind is the idea of self-knowledge and self-inquiry, to distinguish between self and the I or the ego identity. That's the whole point. No, you have to learn to think clearly, to feel things with a sense of moderation and balance, to come to some understanding of what daily life is like. And in my own family, people dealt with life differently. We all went in different directions. Some of us were more happy than others, and that's acceptable. On many levels, other members of my family were much more successful than I've been in relationship or having a job and being fulfilled in life. I've taken a different path. I don't want it easy. I don't want anything in particular. I don't want to solve this problem or solve that problem or think I can isolate a particular thing called a problem that is the main problem, and then isolate that problem and think if you can get rid of that problem of the self and conscious, then you're completely free and you're free of all problems, and in your daily life you don't create any problems because you're not there to create it. You're no longer a self with a personality, and therefore there's nothing there. Which could be seen as pure escapism and irresponsibility. And for those people that knew Krishnamurti, absolutely he was irresponsible, took no responsibility for the effect he had on people negatively. I mean, you think of a little child that gets into trouble in the family for lots of different reasons, and maybe finds it hard to learn to read or finds it difficult to get to do things. I mean, you can't say that is a product of their self, or that's the product of heavy conditioning, or a product of simply the environment or the parents and so forth and so on. No, that's just a child, and mistakes happen, and the child has to adapt and adjust best it can. It inherits all kinds of things, and it's like that the rest of the child's life. You just find things difficult in different areas. Some people are more adept, some people are more adaptable, but you can't blame the child in the sense of blame the self, the child's self, for those problems. And it's no good thinking, oh, those problems have been around for 5,000 years and nobody solved the problem. No, the the difficulties in life, whether they're physical difficulties, social difficulties, intellectual difficulties, or psychological difficulties, every single human being grows up and has to sort things out. It's no good thinking 10 years ago or 1,000 years ago. No, they're living problems. Every animal, every day, has to deal with the difficulties of survival every single day for millions and millions and millions of years. So in exactly the same way, each child has to learn to adapt to the environment, to the world, to the society, and that is the world. If a child wants to learn music and it finds it difficult to play the piano, and maybe it will learn, maybe it won't learn. Whereas another child, it's quite easy. So they go on to become a pianist, and the other child might have to take a job in an institution somewhere that has nothing to do with music. And that's life, that's just life. Or you meet somebody and you live with them and they're quite frustrated about their life and they're irritable, so what? You can understand why they're irritable, why they're frustrated. I mean, during my life, I've never seen anything basically as a problem to do with the human condition. My idea of spirituality really has very little to do with psychological problems. I never think of it that way. I don't think that people should change or be transformed, or if only a certain amount of people will change, maybe the whole world will change if a number of people became enlightened like Krishnamurti. This is how he talked to David Bowen, Professor David Bowen. I don't think of anything like that. I don't think of a group of people changing the world, or one person changing the world, or I just live day by day. I'm interested in spirituality. I've had extraordinary experiences that make me want to know more about spirituality and learning about myself, whether it's reading books or observing my life or whatever I do. It's very individual. And I have a friend who's a Jungian scholar, and he deals with his life in a completely different way. I don't think of changing him or wanting him to be like me or anything like that. I don't want anybody to do anything special. I don't think there is a problem to isolate, whether it's psychological, the self, or anything. And why bring the self into it? Why focus on the self? Why identify the self? Why identify anything? Consciousness is a very complex thing. And the idea of Professor Boehm and Krishnamurti to reduce consciousness and thought to a brain process, to a material process, is very premature. There's no basis for that. And they completely ignore the research done by Carl Jung into the psyche. I think problems are in the human condition, as it were, human nature, human society. I think they're very transformative in the sense you can't isolate problems, they're all interwoven, so that the whole of consciousness, including culture and music and art, and what goes on in the business world, what goes on in the family, what goes on in individual people's consciousness, it's all interwoven together. You can't isolate the psychological problem of the self and say that's a problem, let's eliminate that, as if you could eliminate that from consciousness and memory. You can't just eliminate and isolate a thing called psychological problem. There's no way you could do that. I mean, the whole complication of thought and memory and consciousness and culture and society, I mean, it's impossible to separate psychological knowledge from practical knowledge, or separate music from science. Knowledge is knowledge, the memory is memory, the brain is the brain, conscious is conscious, the psyche is the psyche. It's a vast, complex field that you can't do anything about. Everybody's working together and doing what they can day by day to effect a change in their life, in whatever field they're in, inwardly and outwardly, whatever they're involved in, they're doing their best to get through the day and paint their picture and run a government, and whatever they're doing doesn't really matter. And if the mind, the universal mind, or the one mind comes into your life, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But you're a fully aware self, a fully embodied self within the one mind. And that's something that you might say is added to your overall nature, your overall awareness of yourself. You have a physical body, you have a consciousness and psyche where you dream, and maybe when you die you might go into the psyche, and then you've got the spiritual mind, and they all work together in their own way. Don't have to mix anything up or separate anything off and say it's a completely different thing and somehow cut off from everything else. I mean, freedom to me, in the sense of the one mind, is what it is. I don't think about it. I don't concern myself about it. When I'm free to look, if I'm quiet or walking by the river or sitting in the house, if I'm just free to look and my consciousness is quiet, my body's at rest, and I might look out of the window and feel the freedom of the mind. And then when I'm busy doing something, I'm in my consciousness, I don't think about the mind. And when I'm doing something physical around the house, in the kitchen, I'm not thinking of my ideas or my emotions or my consciousness in general. I'm just doing something in the kitchen. And if I read a book, I read a book. And if I'm looking at the river and my consciousness is silent and I'm just looking as a whole, holistically, then I am. And I just go about and do whatever I do. There's nothing special in the sense that the mind for me is just part of my nature, just part of who I am. I don't go and try to convince other people about it or want to communicate about it as if I can change other people or communicate to other people or do anything about the fact that they may not be interested in the mind, they may not be concerned about it. But I don't think in itself it has any effect on the consciousness or on the world. I'm not saying that the mind isn't something in itself and it will do what it does, but I don't know what it does. I mean, in my consciousness, I don't know what it does. All I know is it gives me a sense of freedom, a sense of openness, a sense of simplicity. Then we can talk about intelligence, which is very important to Krishnamurti, and he thinks that it's through intelligence that you gain insight into the nature of the psychological nature of the self, or the psychologically conditioned consciousness. So he's seeing intelligence as integral to the one mind, or the universal mind. Now, for me, every human being that's ever been born, going right back tens of thousands of years, every single human being that's born has intelligence. And that intelligence is holistic, which means it's not reducible to the brain or to consciousness or to the body or to your thought. It's simply intelligence. You're intelligent. And you can say the person's got a good intellect, they've got a good body, they've got good functioning feelings and understanding, intuition. But no matter the condition of the individual person, physically or in their consciousness, psychologically or culturally, the person is still intelligent. It doesn't matter your education, it doesn't matter your social position. Every human being's intelligent, just like I think every animal is intelligent. A different kind of intelligence, because they're biological organisms, but I'm saying in comparison that every animal born is intelligent and every human being born is intelligent. So every human being born is a self. They have a body, they have a consciousness, and they have intelligence. And that intelligence, you might say, is the intelligence of the whole organism psychophysically. And yes, it is connected to the mind and the self. So you have self and mind, with spiritual perceptions, and those spiritual perceptions of love and beauty and compassion and justice, for example, that they act intelligently within the organism as a whole. So they're objective to the physical and the psychic organism because they're spiritual, they're in their own dimension, and they emanate, as it were, the spiritual perceptions of beauty and love, for example, and compassion, and the spiritual perceptions act creatively and intelligently within the organism. So you could say intelligence is linked to creativity and insight, which again are very, I mean, this terminology, this kind of template is very related to Tibetan Buddhism, but it's what I think myself. Yes, I mean, the language I use can come from various systems of knowledge, various wisdom traditions, but it's the language I'm using that I think best describe what I'm talking about. So self in the one mind is in freedom and emptiness, the body of wisdom, the diamond body. So you could say the self is embodied within the spiritual dimension that I think is objective to the physical universe and objective to the psychic dimension. So when we die, or we leave our body before we die, and we have spiritual awareness of the mind, then we can go into the transcendental nature of nirvana, like the Buddha's supposed to have done. And if you haven't done that, like I haven't done that, but I'm embodied in the one mind, I'm embodied immanently in the world. So as I sit here now, I feel myself is embodied in the one mind. It's a state of emptiness and freedom and silence, self-awareness, and spiritual perceptions that are active, compassion, love, beauty, that kind of thing, in one's spiritual perceptions. And they're not, you can't communicate those. They're not to be communicated in language. You can't share that with another person. When I say share, you can't give it to another person in the sense of it's not like language and emotions and ideas and thinking. You can't communicate it in that way. But you may, if you're with a child, that child may have an essential understanding with you about certain things that are very subtle to do with spiritual perceptions of love and understanding. The child may be receptive, and other people might be receptive. But you can't necessarily consciously make that happen. It might happen creatively and spontaneously, because creativity in that way is very related to the spiritual dimension. So I would call you might say, the operation of the spiritual perceptions in the world as an act of creation. So things can happen, and they may happen between people to a certain extent, that people are receptive to those spiritual perceptions. Or if another person has those spiritual perceptions, then maybe you can share that in some implicit way. Just like two people can sit in a room and enjoy the same piece of music, and they can share the quality and essence of that music together. Or they could be walking in the countryside and sharing the beauty together, the spiritual perception of beauty, so they both see the beauty together, and maybe there's an understanding. Or love might be a communion between two people. So I see intelligence is very much what you're born with, and you might say the intelligence is the holistic aspect of the functioning, the holistic functioning of the whole organism, psychophysically, psychically, consciousness and physical. Because I see consciousness as an interface between body and psyche. So you have deep levels of the psyche that are objective in themselves, and you have levels of the physical universe that are objective in themselves. And consciousness is localized in the body, as it were, and you can expand your consciousness into the world around you, or you can expand your consciousness into the psyche, and then you can withdraw it, bring it back, as it were, and the consciousness is localized in your body, more or less, you could say. So when you dream, your consciousness is in your dream, and if you had visions, an astral journey, you take your consciousness with you, and then you come back into your body. So you could say then you localize your consciousness. So when you're sitting with someone, talking to them, using your consciousness, your thought and your language, which I'm saying is not a physical process, it's not part of the brain. I mean, it may affect the brain, but it's not necessarily part of the brain. Then each person's consciousness is localized. So we each have a localized consciousness. And yet the two bodies are part of the physical universe. And then you could say when you go into a dream, then the two people going into a dream, they're part of the psychic dimension. They're in the psyche. So as Carl Jung says, that when he could leave his body and go into the psyche, then he can meet various entities there, and some of those entities are apparitions, but some of those entities he thinks live in the psyche, they're real within the psyche, and then you can meet people that have died in the psyche. I haven't had the experience like that. I haven't left my body and gone into my psyche. Because I'm mainly concerned with spiritual things, whereas Carl Jung was very much centered on the psyche. And some people, like scientists, are very focused on the physical. And artists and musicians, they're very imaginative and creative, and they're focused on the psyche. So you could say that when you grow up, the self in the one mind has holistic perception. So the spiritual perceptions are holistic perceptions, and then you might say those exist in the spiritual dimension. And intelligence, I would say, you might say, is an aspect of that which enfolds the psychic and the physical. And so when you grow up, you may be thinking about what to do, you know, what to study in college, for example. So you go to college and you wonder what your future will be, what you think you should study, and you're not sure, and you decide what to do. I think your intelligence is working holistically to direct you to put you in the right direction. So you could say you intellectually think about it, you emotionally feel it, you might intuit, you might try to guess or intuit what to do, but I think your overall intelligence is working in the background to put you in the right direction. Now, in Tibetan Buddhism, they have what's called the Dharma, which is the law. And the law, it expresses itself in the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is really the path of doing the right thing, of righteousness. So it's right thinking, right action. So I think your intelligence is related to the Dharma, the law, and that's the same as the Tao. Being in touch with the Tao, being in tune with the Tao, which means the way. And in the Gospels it says, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth and the life. So that means each person's way, truth and life is guided by the spiritual awareness of Christ, or the spiritual awareness of Buddha, which is the same as saying the spiritual awareness of yourself. It's the same thing. So the self is really what's important, and through intelligence guides the organism, guides the ego identity, the identity of a student, the identity of choosing what to do. So the self works through intelligence to guide the identity, the consciousness and the physical body in the right direction. If you're travelling, you know, you might decide to go to a certain place that you haven't been to before, and you could say your overall intelligence is working in the background to move you in the right direction, so things can happen that are right for you. So you learn things and you discover things, and it's like for the ecology and health of your whole organism. So intelligence is looking after your whole organism. And if in your consciousness, say you're egotistic and you want to do what you want to do, and you want to impose your ego identity and ignore the body and ignore intelligence, so you can do things, you can get it wrong in your feelings, you can get it wrong in your intuition, you can get it wrong in your intellect, you can get it wrong in your body. So you do the wrong thing and you don't listen to your intelligence. So you could say, you know, being sensitive to your intelligence isn't something you can know about in your consciousness, but it's more of being sensitive as a whole. It's being, you might say, more aware of whether or not what you did that was wrong can be understood. Maybe it's not a problem, maybe it's just a complication, maybe it's something quite superficial. But if you keep on making the wrong choices and you're damaging your body, you're damaging your emotions, you're damaging your intellect, you're damaging things in relationship to another person or the world, then maybe, you know, you have to be more understanding of what's going on, be more cognizant, more intelligent. I mean, a scientist, if they're working on a particular problem, and maybe they've been working on it for a number of years, and suddenly they have an insight. So you could say they've been looking at it day by day by day for 5 years, and suddenly they have an insight. So you could say they get it right. Their intelligence is functioning to get it right, and finally they get it right. Or it might be, as I say, a student might go in and decide to take a particular course, and they did the right thing because that particular course opened up their capacity. Whereas if they took another course, due to some difficulty in their emotions, some confusion in their mind, they may not have got it right and wasted their life or wasted their time. So even in a basic decision, your intelligence could put you in the right direction if you're open and you have that sensitivity. And if you don't get it right, you don't get it right. And maybe you never think of intelligence, you just use your thinking, your intellect, your emotions, your intuition. You just function as most people do, and most people maybe don't think of intelligence, don't think of self, don't think of the spiritual, etc. Not that it matters. I don't think it actually matters, because people are people, and when you're born, it's like the throw of the dice. I mean, there are so many factors that not everybody lands on their feet. People can be confused and disordered right from a very early age due to what they inherit psychically from their family, what they inherit from their genetic structure. I mean, there are so many factors, environmental, etc. And I think that, I don't go around the world thinking, oh, I feel sorry for those people, or good luck to those people, or pity those people, or tragic and comic and absurd, and people are lucky or unlucky. I don't think like that. I just see people as people. We're all in the same condition. We're born with a body, we're born with intelligence, we're born with consciousness that gets conditioned. And even within my own family, there are all these differences, negative and positive, and none of that bothers me. I just look at life with an open mind and with a sense of understanding, and watch each day unfold without any preconceptions. I'm not trying to change the world, I'm not trying to transform myself, I'm not trying to do anything particular, I'm not trying to impose or my spirituality on other people, or think they should know what I know, or that I've got a solution to a problem, or even that there is a problem to isolate. I don't think there is. And you die when you die. All I know is this one life. I don't know whether we survive death or anything like that. I think we probably do survive death and so forth, and because I feel I'm aware of the one mind, then maybe when I die, I'll go to a spiritual dimension. I don't know. So I just treat life day by day, and when I die, I die. And if I find out otherwise, if I leave my body, went to a spiritual dimension, or discovered a transcendental aspect of the mind, or a universal aspect of the mind in that sense, then so I will. If I don't, I don't. I don't think things should be or shouldn't be. If you're an evolutionist, an atheist, materialist, so be it. Why should that person be any less intelligent, any less fulfilled, any less wise than anybody else? I mean, if you're free in the mind, as I feel I am, I'm not interested in telling other people, or, I mean, I don't, in fact, nobody actually knows that. Nobody actually knows that. In the same way, if somebody's happy, genuinely happy, they don't tell other people they're happy. Why should it be a concern for other people, or even for yourself? You're happy. So if you're free walking down the river, I'm not concerned about other people, whether they're free. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but I don't think about that. Or think about, oh, if there were so many people that were free, wouldn't it be wonderful in the world, and we could change the world, or have an effect on what? I don't think like that. I don't think of using the spiritual or sharing it, communicating it, trying to do this and that. In your consciousness, if you've got something to say to do with knowledge, say it. But for me, the mind happens spontaneously, so I can't talk about a technique or a method or a way to bring that about. I have absolutely no idea. But I do think that each self that's born, in essence, is born within the mind, the one mind. And if you're so heavily conditioned from an early age in your ego identity, and you grow up very interested in music, and that becomes your life, and you never understand the difference between ego and self, or consciousness and mind, so be it. But it's like really saying that people that live in the city, say, and they're musicians, and they spend all their day, almost every day, inside buildings, for example, and maybe once in a while, on a weekend or on a holiday, they go into nature. Well, it's the same way that if you're in your consciousness, it's like living in a room with the curtains drawn, and you don't know there's light outside of the room. You don't know there's this immense space outside of the room, because you live with blinkers on. But I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, saying that musicians that live most of their life in buildings and don't see the light of day, as it were, I'm not judging that. I think if that fulfills you and you produce beautiful music, that's good. If you don't, if your intelligence, as it were, directs you in that way. But all you've got to do is open the curtains and the light comes in and there's an immense space. But I don't think it's a comparison between being free in the mind and being free in consciousness to play beautiful music. I don't think those two things should be mixed up, or mixing up what scientists do in their intellect with what painters do with their imagination. I don't think you should compare or mix those things up. And if the artist isn't interested in science, or the scientist isn't interested in art, it shouldn't make any difference. There are 7 billion people. I mean, there's room for difference. And if a tidal wave comes along and kills 10,000 people, or if a war comes along and kills 10,000 people, that's all part of the planet. If you think of nature and human nature and history and all of that, but just think of it as part of the cosmos, part of the planet. No one's to blame. The self isn't to blame. The person isn't to blame. Russia's not to blame. The communists are not to blame. The Democrats, the imperialism of the American nation. I mean, they're all factors, they're all labels, they're all aspects, they're all part of consciousness. And I think we're all in it together. And it seems to me a waste of time to point the finger and be prejudiced and blame people for the cause of this and the cause. No one's causing anything. No one's causing anything. It's not cause and effect. The whole thing, the whole universe, the solar system, nature, human nature, society is in continual transformation. Day by day by day. The devil's not to blame, God's not to blame, yourself is not to blame, your parents are not to blame, nobody's to blame. No one should be guilty for the human condition. It's an immensely complex process. And it's going on, and one day we'll leave this planet, go to other planets, 500 years from now, 1,000, and what we call the human race, what we call science, what we call culture, will be completely transformed. Completely. And we'll look back and think, yeah, that was life on planet Earth, or that was life in the 21st century. You have understanding, compassion for the world. Don't make it into a problem. Spend, like Krishnamurti, 50 years making consciousness, world, self, ego into a problem. To eliminate, which is rather petty and stupid. It's facile. He wasted his life, I think. Don't think his teaching has any effect whatsoever. Just a drop in the ocean. And yet he thought what he had to say was the centre of the universe. He thought he was the only one that's ever been enlightened. And I think he destroyed a lot of people. And I mean destroyed by people that belonged to the schools, that believed in him, dedicated to him, and all he was saying to them was destroy yourself. And he said that literally. And as I've said in another video, that's nothing but demonic. That's a demonic attitude, both towards himself and to other people. So I would say spiritually, leave people alone to live their life. Be at peace with other people and not interfere, manipulate, try to convince, try to communicate, to try to do anything to change people whatsoever. But in your consciousness, if you want to share your knowledge, share your understanding of the world, your experiences, the books you've read, the people you meet, share that, write your books, communicate on the level of consciousness.